It's been said that Bigfoot exhibits nocturnal behavior, perhaps to hunt or to avoid detection. But the cloak of darkness couldn't hide the creature in the stunning footage you're about to see.
A ranger's worst nightmare became reality. His body was found torn apart in a swamp, surrounded by giant footprints. Whatever did this wasn't human, and it was still out there. Now, Bigfoot researchers don't believe every wild story they hear. In fact, they're usually the first ones to call out hoaxes. But when these same experts say something might be real, that's when you pay attention. This time, it wasn't just a blurry video or a strange footprint. It was a real-life disappearance that ended in a way no one could have expected. The gruesome discovery. A hunter went missing deep in the wilderness. Months later, his remains were found in a horrifying state. And the strangest part was that the evidence around him pointed to something out of a nightmare. On April 27, 2007, after months of searching, a rescue team made a shocking discovery in Minnesota's Beltrami forest. They found the remains of 38-year-old Kory Kelly, who had been missing for nearly 6 months. What they saw was nothing short of horrifying. His body had been cut in half. His bones were scattered and bleached white from months of exposure. But what made it even stranger were the mysterious photos on his camera. Something about this case wasn't adding up. So how did a skilled hunter end up like this? What really happened out there?
Oh, there he goes.
A hunting trip gone wrong. On October 16, 2006, Kory and his friend, Jim Naprude, set out on a hunting trip in Minnesota's Beltrami forest. But this wasn't just any forest. It was a vast, dense, and nearly impossible place to navigate, packed with deep swamps, twisting rivers, and thick woods. Even experienced hunters could easily get turned around. Just 16 miles north of the forest sat Lake of the Woods, a massive freshwater lake at the Canadian border. Everyone knew how dangerous this area was. If you were heading into those woods, you needed to be prepared and armed. Kory and Jim weren't amateurs. They were well-equipped, experienced hunters who knew how to survive in the wild. Kory even brought his yellow hunting dog along for the trip. Their main goal? Hunt grouse, a common bird in the area. At around 4 p.m., the two decided to split up to cover more ground, planning to meet back at their campsite by 6:30 p.m. Jim made it back on time, but Kory never showed up. Something felt off. An hour later, Kory did appear, but sweaty, shaken, and out of breath. He admitted he had gotten lost in the forest. Then, he asked Jim a strange question. "Did you smell that awful stench out there?" Jim hadn't noticed anything unusual, but he figured it could have been a rotting deer or moose. Either way, he shrugged it off. They hadn't caught anything that day, and to make matters worse, Jim realized his car was almost out of gas. He told Kory he was heading into town to fill up the tank. Before leaving, he turned to his friend and warned him not to wander off. As Jim drove away, he saw Kory chasing after a grouse just a few feet from the campsite. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, so he kept driving. When Jim returned to the campsite at 9 p.m., he expected to see Kory by the fire, maybe cooking dinner. But the campsite was completely dark and empty. He called out Kory's name. No response. By 11 p.m., panic set in. Grabbing a flashlight, Jim headed into the woods, searching for his friend. He walked for miles, soaked by the damp night air, but there was no sign of Kory. Something was wrong. He needed help. As he made his way back to his car, he noticed something eerie. 2 strange figures standing in the woods. They weren't moving, just standing there in the dark, watching him. Jim couldn't see their faces, but something felt off. They weren't carrying guns, which was unusual for hunters in the area. Even more unsettling, a horrible stench filled the air. When Jim asked if they had seen his friend, the strangers barely spoke, only suggesting he contact the authorities. Jim wasted no time. He reported Kory missing, and soon, the Beltrami County Sheriff's Department launched an investigation. The search begins. Authorities wasted no time asking Jim questions. When was the last time he saw Kory? Did Kory seem okay? Did he have any medical issues? Was there any chance he had been drinking or using drugs? Jim explained that Kory wasn't the kind of guy to take big risks. He wasn't reckless, didn't drink much, and wasn't into hard drugs. However, he did take painkillers for an old back injury. Even so, Jim was certain that Kory hadn't just wandered off on purpose. Something had to have gone wrong. There was one issue, though. While Kory was an experienced hunter, he wasn't exactly a survival expert. He knew his way around the woods, but wasn't prepared for the freezing temperatures at night. All he had on was a thin pullover, lightweight pants, gloves, and boots, not nearly enough to stay warm if he got lost for long. Jim had even given him a compass earlier that day and told him, "If you get turned around again, just head west. You'll hit a trail sooner or later." Kory also had his phone, but with little to no service in the area, it wasn't much help. With Kory missing, police brought in search dogs, using items from both him and his dog Sammy to pick up a scent. Soon, the search kicked into full gear. Hundreds of volunteers, helicopters, and search teams flooded the area, all trying to find any sign of Kory. Days passed with no luck. Then, on October 25th, searchers finally found something. A clue, but not the one anyone expected. It was Sammy. The dog had survived but was in bad shape, skinny, weak, and barely hanging on. Rescuers rushed him to get care, but they also needed to figure out if he held any clues. Samples were taken from his stomach to see if he had eaten anything that could hint at Kory's fate. But the results shocked everyone. There were no signs that Sammy had eaten human flesh. That meant Kory wasn't nearby, or at least not in a way anyone had feared. As search teams kept pushing forward, more of Kory's belongings began turning up. His hat, a lighter, gloves, and a shotgun shell were scattered along a trail. Then, they found something even more unsettling: his sweatshirt. It looked like Kory had spent the night in that spot. A small fire had been burned down to ash, and near it was a lip balm container. But inside, instead of chapstick, there was a small amount of meth. More items were found further down the trail: his overalls, both socks, almost like he had been shedding layers as he moved. But still, there was no sign of Kory himself.
I knew exactly what we had on camera. It was proof to me and my dad, because who on a Tuesday night is a mile and a half into the woods running around with no flashlight?
A deadly mistake. As investigators dug deeper, it became clear that Kory had moved southeast, following a flooded ditch that wound through the dense, swampy forest. Every item he had dropped, his clothes, gear, and small belongings, formed a straight line along this path. But what troubled searchers the most was the way his clothes were scattered. This suggested he had entered a dangerous state known as hypothermia. When a person's body temperature drops too low, the brain can become confused, making them believe they are overheating even while they are freezing. In response, they sometimes begin removing layers of clothing. A deadly mistake. This chilling discovery pointed to a grim possibility. Kory might have collapsed somewhere in the wilderness and hadn't survived. Despite the worsening weather, search teams pushed forward into November. But when winter storms hit, the brutal conditions made the search nearly impossible. Heavy snowfall covered the landscape, hiding any possible clues beneath a thick, icy blanket. Eventually, the search had to be called off until spring. Months later, on April 27, 2007, with the snow finally melted, the Beltrami County Sheriff's Office and Lake of the Woods County resumed their efforts. It didn't take long. Just 2 hours after restarting the search, a helicopter spotted Kory's body in a swampy area hidden by tall grass. The photos showed him lying next to a flooded ditch, his legs in the water. His upper body was still mostly intact, but animals had scattered some of his remains. When searchers reached him, Kory was only wearing jeans, with his boots lying nearby in good condition. Strangely, search teams had previously come within just 15 feet of this spot, but hadn't seen him due to the thick vegetation. He had made it 12 miles into Lake of the Woods County, more than a mile away from the nearest road. But there was one major mystery. His shotgun was missing and was never recovered. The search for Kory had been massive: 62 different agencies, hundreds of volunteers, and over 6,500 hours spent looking for him. But the details surrounding his death were puzzling. Scattered bones nearby had been stripped clean, some even turning white from months of exposure. Investigators were baffled. At first, Some suspected he had been attacked or even torn apart. But by what? The autopsy only deepened the mystery. There were no signs of injuries, no broken bones, and no evidence that he had been attacked by an animal. Toxicology tests showed he hadn't taken any drugs, not even common substances like meth or opioids. Other than natural decomposition, nothing explained what had happened to him. But then, there was another strange detail. Kory's boots, which were found nearby, seemed to be the last thing he had removed before he died. Hypothermia can make people act irrationally, but it didn't explain why so many of his belongings were scattered over miles. It was clear he had been walking for hours, but why had he gone in the wrong direction? His friend Jim had told him to head west, yet Kory had gone east. Did he panic? Did he think following the flooded ditch would lead him to safety? It wasn't a terrible idea, but in reality, it took him deeper into the wilderness. His belongings were dropped along the way, but it's impossible to know whether this was due to confusion or if he had been trying to leave a trail for searchers. After traveling 5 miles, he started discarding bigger pieces of clothing. A small campfire was discovered near his discarded belongings, showing that he had at least tried to stay warm. But in such a wet, swampy area, finding dry wood would have been nearly impossible. Even more unsettling was the fact that search teams had come close to finding Kory multiple times. His trail of scattered items practically pointed to where he ended up. Yet for some reason, he wasn't spotted until months later. Investigators estimated he had walked between 12 and 14 miles before collapsing, likely not surviving more than 24 hours after getting lost.
Fred, as officials continue to search wooded areas much like this one here, I spoke to that sister. It was very emotional. She's out of state, but she says she wants her brother back home in North Carolina.
But how had he traveled so far, so quickly, in freezing conditions? It seemed like he had a plan, following the ditch in hopes of reaching safety. But when someone is cold, hungry, and scared, their decisions don't always make sense. Investigators believed it was just a tragic case of getting lost in the wilderness. But one question remained. What happened to Kory's shotgun? A new discovery. In 2009, a discovery made everything even more bizarre. A hunter, 39 miles away from where Kory's body was found, spotted something in a small patch of water. It was a shoe. Next to it, he found a blue jacket and a camera. When tested, these items were confirmed to belong to Kory. This raised even more questions. If Kory had somehow traveled there himself, he would have had to walk nonstop for 14 hours without rest or food. But that made no sense. His body had already been discovered in a completely different location. So how did his belongings end up so far away? Investigators hoped the camera might provide some answers. When the film was developed, the photos revealed something chilling. Some images were taken on October 16, 2006. The day Kory disappeared. But others were from the following day, proving he had survived at least 2 nights in the wilderness. At first, the photos seemed ordinary, pictures of trees, streams, and the vast forest. But some were much stranger. They showed deep, isolated parts of the woods, almost as if Kory had come across dens or nests. One image captured massive, human-like footprints. Another showed what looked like the entrance to a large underground cave. All signs began to point to Bigfoot. The rest of the images were difficult to interpret, blurry and unsettling, as if Kory had been trying to photograph something but was too panicked to focus. If he was trying to leave clues about what happened to him, the images didn't provide many answers. Authorities stuck with the simplest explanation. He had died of hypothermia, and scavengers had scattered his belongings over time. But not everyone believed that. Missing 411. David Paulides, an investigator behind the Missing 411 project, found Kory's case especially strange. To him, it was yet another example of hunters vanishing under mysterious circumstances. According to David Paulides, some hunters who enter national parks report feeling watched or even stalked by something lurking in the wilderness. And in the case of Beltrami Forest, he had a theory, one that pointed to something far more unsettling. He suspected the culprit might have been the swamp ape, also called the skunk ape. If you've heard of Bigfoot, then you get the idea. It's a similar creature, except it's said to inhabit the lowland marshes of the southern U.S. It gets its name from the horrible stench it gives off, something witnesses say is so overpowering that it's impossible to ignore.
There's a figure right here, and it definitely appears to be a hominid shape. You see a head, what appear to be shoulders, and 2 arms, and possibly even 2 legs.
Reports describe the swamp ape as around 7 feet tall, slightly smaller than the Bigfoot seen in the northern US and Canada. But some researchers believe it has unique survival tactics, hiding in underground caves or even underwater, making it nearly impossible to track. What makes it most distinctive, though, is the unbearable odor it releases, possibly from a special gland that helps it stay hidden. And that raised a chilling question. Could this have been what Kory smelled earlier? The strange scent he and Jim brushed off? One thing about Kory's disappearance has remained an enduring mystery. His rifle was never found. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to him. In his memory, a 39-mile trail running from central Beltrami forest to Heron Lake was named the Kelly Trail. As for Jim, the friend who had been with Kory that day, the tragedy changed him forever. Racked with guilt over what happened, he eventually gave up hunting for good. As unbelievable as it sounds, this isn't the first time Bigfoot has been linked to strange disappearances and eerie death scenes. A similar legend exists far to the north, in Alaska, where entire villages have been abandoned under mysterious circumstances. Portlock, a once thriving settlement, is now nothing more than a ghost town. But why?
Portlock was cursed and Bigfoot's place and nobody goes there.
Overnight, everybody left.
The peaceful-looking village by the sea had a history that was anything but ordinary. People tried to live there for centuries, yet the town was abandoned not once, not twice, but 4 separate times. Unlike most ghost towns, Portlock wasn't just deserted because of economic struggles or shifting industries. The reason it was left to crumble felt much more sinister, almost as if the land itself was cursed. The first known outsider to visit the area was a British captain named Nathaniel Portlock in 1785. He gave the land its name, but his arrival also marked the start of a dark and chilling legacy, the haunting of Portlock. When Captain Portlock's crew arrived, they discovered signs of an old native village. It was clear that people had once lived there, but for some unknown reason, they had all vanished. This was puzzling. After all, the area had everything needed for survival. There was an abundance of animals, fish, and natural resources, and yet it had been completely abandoned. Despite the mystery, Portlock's crew decided to stay and establish a settlement. But it wasn't long before things took a dark turn. Crew members began falling ill, not just physically, but mentally as well. An eerie sense of dread seemed to settle over them, a fear so overwhelming that even the strongest among them couldn't shake it. Desperation grew. Some were too sick to work, while others were so terrified they refused to leave their shelters. Eventually, they couldn't take it anymore. The crew begged Captain Portlock to leave, and reluctantly, he agreed. They abandoned the land, leaving its secrets behind. But as strange and frightening as their stay was, they were not the first outsiders to experience something unexplainable here. 6 years before Portlock's arrival, a group of Spanish explorers had also attempted to settle in the area. Just like Portlock's crew, they found it odd that such a rich and bountiful land had been deserted by its original inhabitants. It wasn't long before they understood why. A strange illness spread through their ranks, accompanied by an unbearable, creeping fear. Then, the eerie cries began. At first, the sounds came from deep within the surrounding forests, but each night they grew closer. The unsettling wails filled the men with terror, making sleep impossible. One by one, the explorers lost their resolve. Some fell sick, others simply gave in to their fear. Eventually, they had no choice but to flee.
They're out looking for food, maybe raiding the campgrounds or sneaking around.
For generations, stories of Portlock's strange phenomena have kept people away. Whether it was the mysterious sickness, the chilling cries from the woods, or whispers of a creature lurking in the shadows, the place gained a reputation for terror. Even today, its legend remains one of Alaska's most haunting mysteries. And yet, the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Both Portlock and the Spanish explorers had faced harsh environments before. They had survived brutal weather, dangerous wildlife, and unforgiving landscapes. But something about this land was different. Something made even the bravest men abandon it in fear. A land of fear and mystery. For decades, the land remained untouched. Some speculated that infrasound, low-frequency sound waves known to cause nausea, dizziness, and fear, was responsible. Predators like tigers use it to paralyze prey, and sperm whales disorient their targets with it. If infrasound was behind Portlock's terror, something powerful was lurking in the forest. In 1867, a group of nomadic Sugpiaq natives attempted to settle there. The land was bountiful, filled with fish, clams, and game. But within weeks, they were under attack. These weren't rival tribes. The villagers claimed monstrous giants were hunting them, not for resources, but for flesh. Every night they came, tearing through homes with unimaginable brutality. Strangely, when wildlife was plentiful, the giants disappeared. But when food ran scarce, the attacks grew worse. The Sugpiaq fought back, but they couldn't win. By 1905, they abandoned Portlock for good, leaving behind terrifying stories of man-eating creatures. Years later, settlers returned. By 1930, Portlock had grown into a small town, and people began to feel safe. Until 1931, when a logger named Andrew Kamluck ignored warnings and ventured deep into the forest. When he didn't return, a search party was sent after him. What they found was horrifying. Kamluck's body was discovered with his head crushed by his own sled, a sled so heavy no human could have moved it alone. His sled dogs were shredded, and the sled itself had been flung far from the scene. The sheer brutality left the search party in shock. Whatever killed him had unnatural strength.
No matter how much proof you hand to the scientific community, they're not going to believe it until, like I said, they can do an autopsy on it.
As fear spread, more men vanished. Hunters disappeared, only to be found later, mutilated, decayed, or thrown into swamps. Whatever haunted Portlock had never left. Was it Bigfoot? A lost predator using infrasound? Or something else entirely? Whatever haunted Portlock drove people away time and time again. To this day, it remains one of Alaska's most chilling and unexplained mysteries.